Hi, I'm Tighe. Welcome to this edition of Interviews from the Fringe, a series where we look at how social change and consumer perceptions evolve over time, moving from the embryonic phase to the emerging phase, which we typically refer to as trends, until eventually new patterns of behaviour or new norms of behaviour become established in society. Today I'm talking to Laurie Levy, who's the campaign director for the Coalition Against Duck Shooting. And Laurie's story and his struggles with the Coalition have so many lessons for any organisation who's interested in foresight. I started by asking Laurie, how did he come to be involved with the Coalition Against Duck Shooting?
With the duck campaign, I had always thought that it was a terrible injustice. Duck shooters going out onto the wetlands and just blasting away at everything that moved out there. And we went out in 1986 for the first time with a small team of 15 rescuers to challenge 95,000 duck shooters in Victoria.
So in 1986, and duck shooting's been going on for many a year. Tell me about the community attitudes towards duck shooting in the mid-80s.
Well, people were just ambivalent. I think what happens when you have a terrible injustice that just happens every year at a certain time of the year, and people are born into that, they see that as being a normal situation and they don't think too much about it. So what happened after we went in there and said, hey, these birds don't have a voice, they are victims of duck shooters, then suddenly the public sat up and took notice. And these days, a Morgan poll conducted in October 2007 showed that 87% of Victorians want the recreational shooting of native waterbirds banned. And duck shooters have gone from being able to brag about their exploits on the wetlands and what they do shooting birds to having to keep it a secret from their neighbours.
So what you talked about there is a clear change in perception in the eyes of the community over the past 25 years. So can you just take us through perhaps some of the techniques that you felt were successful and also that were necessary in helping to change those perceptions?
Well, duck shooting was always about violence towards native water birds, and it was a brutal thing. It's shocking being out on the water and bearing witness to what those birds go through. So our role was to take the media in and to say to the public, look at what's happening out there. This isn't acceptable. And that's exactly what happened. We showed the public the wounded birds. And what happened, the shooters used to really hide in the background. What we were able to do was to force the shooting organisations out into the open, where they, for the first time, were forced to debate the issue. They were forced to defend themselves or try to defend themselves.
One of the things I refer to in foresight is silent epidemics. And those are the epidemics that people are almost unaware of.
Yes.
And I suppose what you were speaking about before with duck shooting prior to 1986, it was essentially a silent epidemic. Yes. And it was a massive epidemic. People were rather ambivalent, they turned their back to it.
Well, I first became aware of the issue really when the Sun newspaper in the 1960s used to publish photographs of the late Sir Henry Bolte on the front page, dressed up in his camo gear, holding his dead ducks in one hand and his gun in the other hand. And that really turned me off at the time. What's happened, the public now, 87% of Victorians see duck shooting as being one of those old macho type antisocial activities that is no longer acceptable, and that's how all issues work. And as you said before, when suffragettes went out and women had to fight for the vote, I mean, you look back and you say, well, how come women had to fight for the vote? Why wasn't it just given to them?
Laurie's final point there about looking back at the struggles of women to earn the right, and his question there at the end, why weren't women just given the right to vote, is really pertinent, I think, from a foresight perspective or for organisational planning. Often when we look back at the past, we see behaviours that were perfectly acceptable, but from the context of today, appear quite ridiculous. And I suppose from a foresight perspective, my point would be, what are the patterns of behaviour that your organisation subscribes to, or the patterns of behaviour that are dominant in your industry or have been dominant for many years, that future generations will look back and say, that's ridiculous. Now, getting the ability or creating that internal ability to detect that ridiculous behaviour is really what the goal of foresight is within an organisation. And I think, again, using Laurie's stories from the past as an example, the ability to be sensitive to those silent epidemics. So what are those behaviours that are tolerated, and how do you start to see them in a different light so that you can start to evolve your organisation for the future? To me, being sensitive to silent epidemics is arguably the key role of a futurist, and it's the key challenge for applying foresight within an organisation. Thanks for watching.